Hello friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Fury in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel friends in today's video. The movie we are going to talk about is called Fury. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I am going to tell you, I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film, storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Fury is a 2014 American war film written, directed, and co-produced by David Ayer. It stars Brad Pitt with Shia LaBeouf, Logan Lerman, Michael Pena, and Jon Bernthal as members of an American tank crew fighting in Nazi Germany during the final weeks of the European theater of World War II. Ayer was influenced by the service of military veterans in his family and by reading books such as Belton Y. Cooper's Death Traps, a 1998 memoir that underscores the high casualty rates suffered by American tank crews in combat against their better-equipped German counterparts. Production began in England in early September 2013. Initial filming in Hertfordshire led to the start of principal photography in Oxfordshire on September 30, 2013. Filming continued in the city of Oxford and elsewhere and concluded on November 13, 2013. Fury was released on October 17, 2014, receiving generally positive reviews and grossing over $211 million worldwide. Plot: in April 1945, during the Western Allied invasion of Germany, Don War Daddy Collier, a battle-hardened U.S. Army Staff Sergeant in the U.S. 2nd Armored Division, commands an M4A3E8 Sherman nicknamed Fury, whose crew, consisting of Gunner Boyd Bible Swan, loader Grady Kunas Travis, driver Trini Gordo Garcia, and assistant driver Bo Gunner Red, have been together since the North African campaign. After Red is killed in action, he's replaced by Private First Class Norman Ellison, formerly a typist clerk. The crew disdains Norman for his lack of combat experience and aversion to violence. As their tank column advances, Norman spots but does not fire on concealed Hitler Youth, who ambush the lead tank with a Panzerfaust, killing the platoon leader and his crew. Don furiously blames Norman for their loss and assumes command of the column. Norman hesitates again during an assault on a tree line against infantry and anti-tank guns. After the battle, Don orders Norman to execute a captured German soldier. When he refuses, Don wrestles his revolver into Norman's hand and forces him to pull the trigger, killing the soldier and traumatizing Norman. After capturing Kirchhausen, Don and Norman find two German women, Irma and Emma, hiding in an apartment. Don has the women prepare them a meal and supply hot water for a shave. Seeing Norman speaking with the teenaged Emma, Don orders Norman to take Emma into the bedroom, or he, Don, will. Norman does so and has sex with her. Later, during dinner, Fury's crew drunkenly enters, harassing the women and bullying Norman, leading to a standoff with Don before the unit is ordered to move out. While Captain Wagner briefs Don on their next mission, German artillery strikes the town, killing Emma, Wagner, and other U.S. soldiers. Norman suffers a breakdown. Don's tank platoon is ordered to seize and hold a vital crossroads to protect the division's vulnerable rear. A lone German Tiger ambushes and destroys the other three tanks before being defeated by Fury, which loses its radio in the battle. Unable to call for reinforcements, Don decides to continue the mission alone. Fury is immobilized by a landmine at the crossroads. Norman is sent to scout and spots a Waffen-SS battalion approaching. The crew opts to leave until Don insists on staying with the immobilized tank. Norman elects to stay and convinces the others to stay also. The men disguise Fury to appear knocked out and assume their positions to make a last stand. Exchanging Bible verses, Norman earns the nickname Machine as a show of the crew's newfound support. Fury ambushes the Waffen-SS battalion, which takes heavy casualties. During the ensuing skirmish, Grady is killed by a Panzerfaust shot that penetrates the turret. Gordo is shot in the turret, dropping a live grenade inside the tank and sacrificing himself by shielding it with his body. Bible is killed, and Don wounded by a German sniper. Out of ammunition and surrounded, Norman contemplates surrendering, but Don directs him to escape through the floor hatch as the Germans drop grenades into the tank. Norman hides underneath the tank as the grenades kill Don, and is spared by a Waffen SS soldier who spots him, but doesn't alert his comrades. Norman crawls back into the tank the next morning, covering Don's corpse with his jacket, and is discovered there by American soldiers. Norman is praised as a hero, as combat medics help him to an ambulance, where he watches an American column advance past Fury's wreck, surrounded by dozens of dead Waffen SS soldiers. Cast: Brad Pitt as Don War Daddy Collier, tank commander; Shia LaBeouf as Boyd Bible Swan, tank gunner; Logan Lerman as Norman Machine Ellison, tank assistant driver bow gunner; Michael Peña as Trini Gordo Garcia, tank driver; John Bernthal as Grady Kunas Travis, tank loader; Jason Isaacs as Captain Wagoner; Brad Henke as Sergeant Davis; Jim Parrick as Sergeant Binkowski; Xavier Samuel as Lieutenant Parker; Scott Eastwood as Sergeant Miles; Kevin Vance as Sergeant Peterson; Ana Maria Marinka as Irma; Alicia von Rittberg as Emma. Production. Casting. On April 3, 2013, Sony started assembling the cast for the film when Brad Pitt, who previously starred in the film Inglourious Basterds 2009, entered final talks to take the lead role of War Daddy. On April 23, Shia LaBeouf joined the cast. On May 1st, it was announced that Logan Lerman had also joined Fury's cast, playing Pitt's crew member Norman Ellison. On May 14th, The Hollywood Reporter announced that Michael Peña was in negotiations to play a member of Pitt's tank crew, ultimately joining the cast. On May 17th, John Bernthal joined the cast as Grady Travis, a cunning, vicious, and world-wise Arkansas native. On August 26th, Scott Eastwood also joined the cast, playing Sergeant Miles. On September 19th, Brad William Henke joined as Sergeant Roy Davis, commander of another tank, Lucy Sue, the 3rd Sherman destroyed by the Tiger. Jason Isaacs was cast on October 7, 2013. Other cast members include Xavier Samuel, Jim Parrick, Eugenia Kuzmina, Kevin Vance, and Branko Tomovich. Music. Main article: Fury Original Motion Picture Soundtrack. On November 19, 2013, composer Stephen Price signed on to score the film. Vares Sarabande released the original soundtrack album for the film on October 14, 2014. Reception. Box office Fury grossed $85.8 million in the United States and Canada and $126 million in other countries for a worldwide total of $211.8 million against a budget of $68 million. U.S. and Canada. Fury was released in the United States and Canada in 3,173 theaters and earned $1.2 million from Thursday night previews at 2,489 theaters. On its opening day, the film grossed $8.8 million. It went on to top the box office with $23.5 million, an average of $7,406 per theater. The film's opening weekend gross was David Ayer's biggest hit of his directorial career, surpassing the $13.1 million debut of End of Watch. In its second weekend, the film earned $13 million, dropping 45%. Other countries. Fury was released a week following its North American debut and earned $11.2 million from 1,975 screens in 15 markets. The film went number 1 in Australia, $2.2 million, and number 5 in France, $2.1 million. In UK, the film topped the box office in its opening weekend with $2.69 million, $4.2 million, knocking off Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which earned $1.92 million, $3.1 million from the top spot. In its second weekend, the film added $14.6 million in 44 markets, bringing the overseas cumulative audience (CUM) to $37.8 million. It went number 1 in Finland for $10,000 and in Ukraine $420,000. Critical response. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 76% based on 262 reviews, with an average rating of 6.910. The website's critical consensus reads, "Overall, Fury is a well-acted, suitably raw depiction of the horrors of war that offers visceral battle scenes but doesn't quite live up to its larger ambitions." On Metacritic, the film has a score of 64 out of 100, based on 47 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A to F scale. The opening weekend audience was 60% male, with 51% over the age of 35. Mick LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle gave a 4 out of 4 rating and wrote, "A great movie lets you know you're in safe hands from the beginning." The New York Times critic A.O. Scott praised the film and Pitt's character. "Within this gore-spattered, superficially nihilistic carapace is an old-fashioned platoon picture, a sensitive and superbly acted tale of male bonding under duress. James Berardinelli also gave the film a positive review, saying, "This is a memorable motion picture, accurately depicting the horrors of war without reveling in the depravity of man, like Platoon. Equally, it shows instances of humanity without resorting to the rah-rah, sanitized perspective that infiltrated many war films of the 1950s and 1960s. It's as good a World War II film as I've seen in recent years, and contains perhaps the most draining battlefield sequences since Saving Private Ryan." Kenneth Turan for the Los Angeles Times praised the film highly, writing, "The best job I ever had sentence is one of the catchphrases the men in this killing machine use with each other, and the ghastly thing is they half believe it's true." Peter DeBruge said in Variety, "Brad Pitt plays a watered-down version of his Inglourious Basterds character in this disappointingly bland look at a World War II tank crew." New York Magazine's David Edelstein said, "Though much of Fury crumbles in the mind, the power of its best moments lingers. The writhing of Ellison as he's forced to kill, the frightening vibe of the scene with German women, the meanness on some soldiers' faces and soul sickness on others." Although many commentators will no doubt immediately compare the new WWW2 epic Fury to Quentin Tarantino's brilliant Inglourious Basterds, largely because both films star Brad Pitt as a heavily scarred, drawling army man leading his men in a quest to kill as many Nazis as possible. It is actually closer in tone to a straightforward and unironic Guys on a Mission tale along the lines of The Dirty Dozen or Where Eagles Dare, with a heavy dollop of gruesome bloodletting depicting the true horrors of armed conflict that have been de rigueur for the war movie genre in the wake of Saving Private Ryan. It may sound like an interesting approach for a modern war film, but it doesn't take long to realize that writer-director David Ayer has spent more time adding flesh to his battlefield sequence than he has in fleshing out the screenplay. The end result, while technically impressive, is a dramatically bloodless affair, despite the gallons of gore on display. Set during the waning days of the war, with Allied forces marching through Germany on the way to Berlin, and the Nazis pulling out all the stops, including putting kids into battle and hanging those who refuse to fight, to stop them. Pitt plays Sergeant Don War Daddy Collier, the commander of a 5-man Sherman tank crew that has been together since North Africa, and who he is determined to see survive to the end of the war. His men include the religious-minded gunner Bible, Shia LaBeouf, the Hispanic lead driver Gordo, Michael Pena, and the borderline scumbag mechanic coon-ass, John Barenthal. As the story opens, they have just lost their second driver in battle, and at their next stop, they take on a new man in Norman Ellison, Logan Lerman, a wet-behind-the-ears type who has only been in the war for a few weeks as a typist and who has never fired a gun before, let alone served in combat. Needless to say, the other members of the Fury crew are not impressed with the new guy, and are even less so when he winds up barfing all over the place while cleaning up the blood in the cab left by his predecessor. Things get worse when Norman chokes during his first confrontation in a move that leads to the grisly death of another tank commander in their column. Eventually, he proves his mettle and begins to mesh with the team at last, and War Daddy even takes him out during a brief stopover to an impromptu rendezvous with a couple of German women, Anna Maria Marinksa and Alicia von Rittberg, to relieve him of his virginity. After an ambush that wipes out the other tanks that they are traveling with, Fury finally breaks down, but before it can be repaired, and the 5 men are placed in the seemingly impossible position of trying to single-handedly stave off the arrival of 300 SS troops. Ayer is best known for writing and/or directing such gritty cop dramas as Training Day and A Watch, and this year's brutally idiotic Arnold Schwarzenegger vehicle, Sabotage. And with this film, he takes a giant leap forward in terms of scope and ambition, but only generates middling results. When it comes to the details, Ayer excels. He convincingly evokes the look and feel of this period in history, and also does a decent job of suggesting how a quintet of people who would likely never even acknowledge each other in other circumstances can forge together into a single working unit in times of duress. The action sequences are also nicely staged, with one battle in which the smaller but faster Sherman races around to fight off a larger but slower German Tiger tank, offering some genuine thrills. The trouble with Fury is that while stocking up on all the little details, Ayer has failed to provide much of a narrative for them to hang upon. The film may remind some viewers of the kind of thing that one might have seen on the bottom half of a double bill in 1943. The storyline is trite and unsurprising. The dialogue is almost always just a little too on the nose, and the climactic standoff against the approaching Nazi forces feels too contrived for its own good. In those aforementioned B movies, that wasn't such a problem because they usually clocked out at 80 minutes or so and moved quickly enough so that viewers usually didn't notice such flaws. Fury, on the other hand, clocks in at 134 minutes, and it makes you feel every one of them in ponderous detail. The sequence with the German women starts off nicely enough, but goes on forever before finally arriving at its inevitable payoff. Speaking of ponderous, the film is, between Stephen Price's oppressive score and the cacophony of combat, so noisy that if there was an Oscar given for most sound, it would be the clear frontrunner. On the acting front, Brad Pitt is good. Of course, he is almost always good, but never quite finds a way of approaching his character that doesn't call to mind his indelible performance as Aldo Raine in Inglourious Basterds. Likewise, his co-stars turn in decent enough performances, though LaBeouf's attempts to grizzle himself up via darkened teeth and an especially unfortunate mustache may inspire a few bad laughs early on. But the characters are so paper-thin and devoid of any shading beyond their one approved character trait that they aren't able to do much of anything with them to make them live or breathe, since we have not been given any particular reason to care about these particular characters, other than the fact that they are not Nazis. The final conflict and the personal sacrifices they make wind up having precious little dramatic impact. Fury isn't so much a bad movie as it is a fairly unnecessary one. From a technical standpoint, it is occasionally quite impressive, and fans of the WW2 genre as a whole might find it to be of some interest, though those with weaker constitutions may want to give it a second thought considering all the blood and guts on display. From a dramatic and emotional perspective, however, it just sort of lumbers along without ever generating a real sense of interest in what is happening on the scene. If only Ayer had spent a little less time on the physical aspects of this project and given a little more thought to the story, characters, and dialogue, he might have been able to truly do Fury honor instead of giving viewers just another war potboiler. Review: Fury. The spirit of Sam Peckinpah hangs over this surprisingly grim macho tank drama, shot in Hertfordshire and Oxfordshire, which marries the tough men-in-peril thrills of an old-fashioned war movie with the post-Saving Private Ryan viscera of a modern war-is-hell parable. Razor-cut Brad Pitt is Don War Daddy Collier, battle-scarred commander of a 2nd Armored Division tank crew who have fought tooth and nail from North Africa to Normandy and now find themselves in endgame Germany facing the total chaos of Hitler's last stand. When one of their number redecorates the inside of the titular tank with his face, boyish clerk Norman, Logan Lerman, is sent to fill the gap, writer-director David Ayer showing us the horrors of the battlefield through the eyes of an innocent Abrord. Ideals are peaceful, history is violent, Collier tells his new charge, who must learn to put aside his pacifist qualms and mow down Nazis while shouting, "Die, motherfuckers," like he means it. With its trench mud palette and limb-mangling splatter aesthetic, Fury takes no prisoners in terms of graphic detail, arms, legs, and heads being severally severed in pursuit of maximum meat. Like his scalp-hungry renegade in Inglourious Basterds, Pitt's war daddy likes killing Nazis, although here his soul appears the more hollow for it. Scenes of prisoners being shot in the back and women serving as hapless spoils of war are juxtaposed with much religious breastbeating Boyd Bible Swan, an uncharacteristically bearable Shia LaBeouf, quoting scripture while Norman wrestles with his Episcopalian squeamishness. Ultimately, such transcendent concerns are more for show than effect. As with End of Watch, character remains an adjunct to the action, which is Ayer's true forte. Lacking the single-minded intensity of Samuel Mayaz's Lebanon, which did a cleaner job of trapping its audience inside a tank, this is still undeniably stirring stuff, buoyed by Stephen Price's boisterous score, which builds toward an end credits theme reminiscent of Jerry Goldsmith's demonic Ave Satani from The Omen. Blimey. Fury is one of the best World War II films in recent memory. While the war has been covered by many different filmmakers in both film and television, David Ayer's 2014 action thriller explores a different side of the conflict, as it focuses entirely on the crew of a small American tank crew during the final months of the European theater. Ayer brought a sense of gritty realism to his crime films, including End of Watch and Harsh Times, and Fury has that same authenticity. Ayer may think that history has forgotten some of his work, but Fury is an unforgettable film. Unfortunately for the film's cast, making the film as authentic as possible also meant going through the same rigorous training regime that their characters would have experienced. Fury may now be considered to be a modern war classic, but being on set was a literal hell for the film's stars. What is Fury about? Fury begins in April 1945, when the Allied forces began a full-scale invasion of Germany. Their advances are met with strong resistance, as the Nazis are unwilling to give up their home country without a proper fight. To deal with the overwhelming resistance from the Germans' ground forces, the Allies utilize heavy-duty M4 Sherman tanks to lead their ground assaults. The senior staff sergeant Don Collier, Brad Pitt, nicknamed War Daddy, is put in charge of an M4 nicknamed Fury. War Daddy's crew includes the tank gunner Boyd Bible Swan, Shia LaBeouf, Trini Gordo Garcia, Michael Pena, Grady Coon-Ass Travis, John Bernthal, and the gunner Red. War Daddy's crew have served together since the North African campaign and have essentially gotten to know each other as family. Unfortunately, a brutal battle on the outskirts of Germany costs Red his life. This means that Fury will have to hire a new gunner to take part in one of the most important campaigns of the war. Given the mission's importance, War Daddy's crew is hesitant about bringing on a new member of the team. They're even more skeptical when they learn that their new gunner is the young, inexperienced Private Norman Ellison, Logan Lerman. Ellison hasn't seen much action, and the crew doubts that he has the tenacity to serve such a critical role on their crew. Ellison learns the importance of trust from his experience with the Fury crew. Each man must completely trust that they can do their duties. Lerman proved that he was much more than a high school movie star and could deliver more mature performances. What happened on the set of David Ayer's Fury? One of the reasons why Fury works so well is that the tank crew feels like an actual family unit. These men are used to spending time in close quarters with one another and have all experienced the trauma of combat together. According to an interview conducted with IndieWire, David Ayer felt that authenticity was critical to the film's success. His motivations were personal. Ayer had several family members who served in the military, including 2 grandparents who fought in World War II. Ayer, a veteran himself, said that he became fascinated how men in combat process trauma, and the movie shows a little bit of why PTSD happens and how these dark family legacies for those who have had servicemen in their families. Ayer noted that his grandparents never talked about their experiences in the war and wanted to make sure that the film was as respectful to their experience as possible. Ayer proved that he was much better suited for historical dramas like Fury and not comic book adventures like Suicide Squad. David Ayer ensured that the actors embodied this theme by putting them through a rigorous training regime. Per IndieWire, Pitt said that he, Lerman, Bernthal, LaBeouf, and Pena went through months of training, and we all had a full, immersive experience. While Pitt had previously starred in Quentin Tarantino's World War II epic Inglourious Basterds, that couldn't prepare him fully for his work on Fury. According to Pitt, Ayer's schedule included training, getting to know the tank, sparring each other, throwing punches at each other before we even started to get to know each other. Pitt said the immersive on-set experience also involved meeting with real veterans. This culminated in a literal boot camp that Pitt said left the cast cold, wet, hungry, physically exhausted. However, he noted that Ayer gave them tasks that would bring us together, bond us, discover each other's weaknesses and strengths, and establish a pecking order. He stated that he became a better father and a more tolerant man as a result of the experience. While the experience may have ended up being a rewarding one, that wasn't always clear to the cast during the filming experience itself. Pena joked that doing a movie with Ayer is like getting a root canal, and that everyone was broken after a few days of the boot camp. Although Fury hasn't been Pena's only action role, from the actors' accounts, this shoot was likely much more intense than anything that he experienced filming the Ant-Man movies. The camaraderie translated well to the screen, as the characters often joke around with each other as they initiate Ellison into their non-traditional family. Lerman said that this made his role particularly challenging because he had to be the new guy, after the entire cast had spent so long getting to know each other before shooting began. He said that his co-stars all laughed because they gave me a really hard time, and that it was a challenging position to stay in, to create conflict with these guys constantly, being nonconformist. Tensions between actors on set also had their boiling point moments. An altercation allegedly occurred between Scott Eastwood, who plays Sergeant Miles in the war film, and Shia LaBeouf when LaBeouf confronted Eastwood over a miscommunication about filming. LaBeouf felt Eastwood, who was spitting chewing tobacco on their tank, was acting disrespectfully. Brad Pitt detailed how he diffused the volatile situation in an interview with GQ, citing the severity of the boot camp experience the actors endured in preparation for their roles as one factor leading up to the altercation. In the end, it turned out that the script had actually stated that Eastwood should do exactly what he was doing, spitting tobacco on the tank. A stuntman was stabbed filming Fury. Fury feels like an authentic representation of the pivotal combat of war, but unfortunately, the film may have gotten a little too real in some instances. During the production of one of the major action sequences, a stuntman was impaled by a bayonet and rushed to the hospital. A spokeswoman for the film stated that while the incident was unfortunate, the extra in question left the set laughing and talking. On-set safety is no joke, especially for films like Fury, which require a high amount of technical precision. The aftermath of the unfortunate tragedy on the set of The Western Rust has hopefully convinced Hollywood film productions to add a new level of safety precautions when using real weapons on set. Why Fury is one of the best World War II movies. David Ayer also admitted in the interview that he wanted to throw away all expectations about World War II films. He said that a lot of these Hollywood productions were co-funded by the Army by providing assets to tell a story, and that the methodology was repeated. Fury stands out because it's not a movie about a battle or an event, and the star is the behavior of the men in this horrible situation. While Fury showcases the men's heroism in combat, it does not end with the rousing nationalistic fanfare that films like Saving Private Ryan do. Fury does a great job of introducing the audience to the tone of the conflict through Ellison's character arc. Ellison starts as a novice on the team and only slowly learns about the expectations that are expected of him. Ellison begins to lose his sense of innocence throughout the war. While he starts as a bright-eyed rookie, he becomes a more grizzled veteran like War Daddy by the end of the war. Showing how conflict changes a soldier's perspective is a quality that all great war films have. That's not to say it should lessen the impact of such material, because I'm sure things worry exactly like this in the heat of battle, but the constant worrying depiction of it began to wear itself out well before the film came to an end. A good war film should never hold back on the violence, but it should hold something back to invoke shock, rage, or some other emotional response. The white noise of battle becomes a deafening roar that most will tune out by the end. Wara is hell. The script by Ayer isn't what I'd call particularly a revealing. It's your basic new fish throw-in with the old stagers and forced to confront the horror of war story. And as the audience, we're expected to come along for the ride on that journey. It's the kind of story we've seen before, not on Leia and war films, and as much as I'd like to say Ayer brought something new to the genre or managed to eke out some kind of new slant to show us about how shitty Warrior is, he can't. It's a screenplay I'd lay in the box marked perfunctory that is. It is what it needs to and not a lot more. Character, aside from Pitt's and Lerman's, are generic and or poorly conceived. Although the fact that almost every war film in history has played in this sandbox more than once perhaps leaves little room for new material in this instance, yet even working with the well-known war movie tropes, Ayer can't muster a decent ensemble of characters. Xiao's boy is the resident Christian willing to pray and lead the men through whatever God's will might be that day. Michael Pena is a weirdly silent, softly spoken Mexican fighting for the USA. While John Burnt is the one whose spirit is broken, and he's totally batshit crazy at having to remain in the war. Burnt's slackjaw performance actually reminded me of Tim Blake Nelson's Rolina. Oh brother, where art thou? Only here it's more serious. Wara is hell. The film is salvaged somewhat by excellent performances by Brad Pitt and Logan Lerman. Pitt struggles a little with a weary, unafraid commander role. A role similar in tone to Tom Hanks' Cena. Private Ryan only without the lost soul. He's the one who keeps his men fighting, on wanting to give up himself, but knowing his country and his men need him to keep going. A momentary breakdown. Scene occurs early in the film approximates Hanks' similar moment in Ryan. Only Pitt's attempt comes too early, to pay off in a significant emotional way. We don't really know of the character or appreciate his struggles, and already we're asked to empathize with his emotional freefall. I didn't quite feel it yet. Pitt's solid. Performance throughout the movie is one of Fafuris's strongest elements. He's aided by Logan Lerman as wide-eyed. Norman, the generic new fish role which asks Lerman to emote genuine horror, and an inner strength of that vanishes relatively quickly once the tank shells start flying. Lerman's a competent actor. He was terrific. He had the perks of being a wallflower, and he certainly gives his all here. But the character is so predictable and old hat. He doesn't have much to sink his teeth into that we haven't seen before 100 times. For what he do as a half, have though he certainly isn't afraid of making the role his own and elevates the material as best he can. War sucks, right? Perhaps a biggest achievement is its production design. With only a huge caveat that pulls the viewer into the trenches and battlefields of Germany in We. The scope of the film is both intimate and epic. The landscape of German warfare is horrifying, with rending flesh accompanying concussive threshing of sodden earth and shredded metal. The battles depicted are utterly brutal, faultless in almost every regard, with specific attention to the way in which the human body can be mutilated by artillery and ordnance. The oppressive color scheme and Ayer's decision to shoot a lot of the final act in dim light and or darkness does make some of what happens in the latter stages of the film a little hard to make out. But confusion within a war film is almost an expectation instead of an accident. The fact that the color scheme also makes it difficult to determine ally from enemy in the heat of battle is particularly interesting, and one wonders if friendly fire was a common occurrence in these times of trouble. The single biggest caveat to the film's production is the use of tracer rounds within the battle sequences. The tracers are supposed to allow the shooters to know exactly where they're firing, but Ayer's decision to make these rounds all manner of different colors ends up looking like a Star Wars movie than a Wii movie. It may or may not be historically accurate. I'm no war expert. But from a visual point of view, Ida pulled me out of the movie. I actually giggled at the first time it happened because I half expected the Millennium Falcon to drop down and blast a German tank to bits instead. I get that people in the audience need to know what's going on and who is firing upon whom, but the barrage of red, yellow, blue, and orange tracer rounds was a little too obsequious considering the tone of the remainder of the movie. They looked like laser beams. Furia is a solidly made movie. It's a high watermark for tank warfare on celluloid. Because I don't think the sheer terror of tank warfare has ever been portrayed in a teaser manner, but as a war film lumped together with the likes of Fat Private Ryan Bandit Brothers, Black Hawk Dana, and the Mana Others. It tends to become lost in the jumble. There's nothing that made me jump up and exclaim some manner of artistic brilliance. Yeah, there's graphic violence. There's brave soldiers fighting to the past. There's evil Nazi soldiers and a good one in there too. And the midpoint scene where a couple of nice young German women remind the men about the good in the world. But it's all a cliched blitzkrieg of explosions, gunfire, and male bonding inside it in Can of Death. Ayer problems are many, most of which revolve around a sense of being there, done that. But it's well made and largely well acted, even if the characters don't broach new material, and the plot seems a little reminiscent of Fabro and Barr. Well, every other war movie, David is one of those filmmakers I've always kept an eye on. From his disturbingly powerful directorial debut Harsh Times to Fury, Ayer seems to be a master in telling intimate tales of people leading very dangerous jobs. His 2012 film, End of V, made it on my list of top 10 films of that year. However, his latest foray seems to lack the grittiness of his earlier films. Maybe it's the big budget or the all-star cast. Whatever it is, Fury looks and feels like a film production. When a film is great, for the briefest of moments, the viewer forgets he's watching a movie. There are films that demand this type of realism. Muy picture told from the perspective of a single tank definitely qualifies as such. Fury is the Hollywood version of Samuel Ma's Lebanon. It is big, loud, and full of action sequences. And although there are moments of greatness in Fury, at the end, it is nothing but a conventional war film. There isn't a single scene in this film that I haven't seen before. Rather than being a film about soldiers in a tank, it chooses to be a Wii version of the 300. That's right, one tank against 300, literally soldiers. The premise might excite some filmgoers out there, and they will enjoy it. It is a good action film after all. It's too bad. I was expecting more. It is too bad. I was expecting anything but a thrill ride. Deep down, I was hoping Fury would be 2 tank films. What that brute is to submarine films. The latter nails the suffocating experience down to every bolt. It is claustrophobic, intense, boring, it should be, and mentally exhausting. Scenes in Das Brute seem so real you can almost smell the stench from within the U-Boot. Fury, on The other hand concerns itself more with surprising the audience with unexpected bursts of violence and building a confused film towards a heroic last stand. Nothing new here. That said, the chemistry between the crew seems very natural. One can tell that a lot of scenes were probably improvised. Shia LaBeouf delivers a strong supporting performance to Pitt's strong silent-type role of War Daddy, and Lerman hold his own against both actors. However, the film feels lost and hurried despite its lengthy runtime. At times, it felt like it was going down the gritty documentary feel route that I was hoping for. But then, it's almost like Ayer had a change of heart and turned it into a coming-of-age flick at war, before turning wheels again and ending it with the oh-so-overdone outnumbered battle. Many will enjoy Fury. I've seen way too many conventional war films to fall for one that doesn't add anything new or different to the genre. It lacks the philosophical undertones of The Thin Red Line, the gritty claustrophobia of Death Boot, the haunting psychology behind Apocalypse Now, and the intense realism of Saving Private Ryan. Fury is an exercise of mediocrity. Director David Ayer makes no exceptions for his American exceptionalist to Fury, a World War II story about a five-man American tank crew facing off against a legion of German soldiers usually associated with Los Angeles urban crime dramas, Harsh Times, A Street Kings, A End of Watch Air. Applies his sense of situational realism with his affinity for Hollywood-style dramatics in this gritty war picture. While costumes, machinery, and on-location landscapes all contain a striking verisimilitude, the film isn't mined from history, but rather Ayer's palpable appreciation of classic war yarns, namely those by Samuel Fuller, Steel Helmet, and the Big Red One that were turned out one after another during Hollywood's golden age. It's familiar material. Macho men perform bravely and carry out their duties regardless of the absurdity of their orders, exclaiming, "Best a job I ever had," as they mow down Nazis at the tail end of Way, circa April 1945. It's all very gung-ho stuff with a few poignant moments to curb the rampant changing. Ayer's well-researched setup concerns the bond between soldiers who, despite their disparate real-world walks of life, form a connection when fighting alongside one another on the front lines. Brad Pitt plays Sergeant Don Warad Delier, a 2nd Armored Division tank commander who has fought Nazis from Africa to the Netherlands. Now he's in Germany, where the war is all but over. But the Nazis still have fight left in them. Ward Deck commands a team consisting of stereotyped grunts inside a metal coffin, and it's their home, and they've dubbed it Fury, which is stenkled on the 76 millionaire barrel. Each soldier comes with their own war name and a two-dimensional personality, an abrasive and rather terrible hillbilly. Grady. Astrovist John Byrne serves as a shell loader. The resident religious spiritualist boy Bible, Swan Shia LaBeouf, runs the cannon. The Mexican Amian driver, Trini Gordo Garcia, Michael Pena, womanizes and drinks too much. But our entry point into this unique wartime microcosm is fresh-faced newcomer Norman Ellison. Logan Lerman, a military typist unprepared for the ugly battles ahead. Over the course of the film's 24-hour timeline, Norman serves as our proxy for War Daddy's marauders, a tough group with skins of leather. On the approach to clear a small town, Norman fails to shoot down some German soldiers, and so War Daddy resolves to administer a cruel initiation. He slaps the boy around and forces a gun into his hand to shoot a captured SS officer. At first, Norman isn't cut out for war. He seems to have decency. The others lack. During an interlude in a secured German town, War Daddy and Norman engage a woman, Anna Maria Morena, and her pretty teenage daughter, Ma Alicia von Rittberg, for a dramatic interlude. It's a civilized break until the others enter the room and spoil it, and the scene gives way to a grim and tragic turn. It's an excellent sequence in an otherwise commonplace actionized war story, and it allows Pitt and Lerman, who are the film's only soldiers who feel developed in any kind of meaningful way, to layer their characters. To set up the climactic battle, War Daddy receives some brief high-stakes orders from his captain, Jason Isaacs, and they're quickly off with several other tanks to protect a crossroads from any Nazi traffic. On the way, they're outmatched by a German Tiger tank, a heavy gunner that makes quick work of the Fury crew's escorts. The final showdown finds War Daddy's crew immobilized and alone at the crossroads, facing an SS battalion some 300 strong. For reasons never fully explained, War Daddy has a particular hatred for Sen flares up at their mere mention of their presence. So he resolves to stay and fight a losing battle, and the others follow him. The action comes with a unique look, courtesy of Ayer's research. Nighttime gunfire unleashes glowing tracer rounds which burn in reds and greens. The battle sequences could be inspired by a Star Wars. But perhaps it's the other way around. Cinematographer Roman Vation shoots on English soil in almost perpetual fog, which allows tracer rounds to glow even during the day. The rest of Vation's color scheme is muted, muddy, and great, to reflect the downturn of the war. Fernilda's section is famously said that it's impossible to make an anti-war film because the depiction of violence inherently thrills the viewer, and the thrill of violence contradicts any anti-war theme. Afloria could hardly be considered an anti-war film, and yet it contains anti-war film moments that suggest a war hell mentality which clashes with its action-centric approach. Just as Ayer perveives opposing strains of realism and Hollywood heroism, the director's production contains scenes of heavy emotional consequence. The tragic interlude with the German women underscores the psychological damage incurred by soldiers undone by long stretches of exciting violence. And this contradiction in tone leaves the film unbalanced. The downfalls of war are less on Ayer's mind than recreating the most intense segments of Fast Saving Private Try and given a fury surface realism and his character's male camaraderie. It's easy to make that connection. Ayer's brief moments of pow sway far less on the viewer than his relevant obsession with the violence and gore of war. Heads explode, mushy bodies are run over by the tank, and limbs are lost. It's nothing audiences haven't seen in Spielberg's influential war film, but it feels embellished by Ayer for the sake of excitement and, dare say, entertainment value. Pitt and Lerman give fine performances, and the supporting cast fills their roles serviceably. But these tired soldier stereotypes barely resonate outside of the basic duty-bound Americans who fought and died in movies for decades. Fortunately, a furry looks fantastic. Ayer shot on 35mm films. Stock, instead of the now industry-standard digital, and the visible grain and textures add to the old-fashioned, yet realistic visual presentation. Ultimately, though, Ayer's treatment seems to acknowledge wartime atrocity almost as an obligatory afterthought, whereas the tank, gunfire, and bloodshed receive his full attention. In the end, the experience is empty and leaves us wondering what it's all about. Most films concerning World War II fall into the same boat. They all write to be gritty and realistic while telling a dramatized tale of heroics or sadness. What separates the many World War II films is the acting, the heart of the movie, and how well this story is told. Dada Floria does all of this very well, which should be expected with a solid cast that fills out most of the roles in the movie. While Brad Pitt's portrayal of Don Ward Dad Dellier should be taking top honors for his acting, it's come to the point where that's just what you expect from most of Brad Pitt's roles. It's his supporting cast that really steals the show. This is partially because some of them offered surprisingly good work, while others went above and beyond to really sell the war tour film. Shia LaBeouf Boyd Bible Swan, Michael Pilda ± A. Trini Gordo Garcia, John Byrne Gray as Travis and Logan Lerman, Norman Ellison really steal the show. Ina Fury Bible Gordo and as makeup War Daddy's primary tank crew, while Ellison is the newcomer to the group who isn't even properly trained in how to operate tank as evolution as a character takes the audience on a journey through the thankless job of a tank crew in World War II. Thanks to the solid acting of Lerman, the movie has plenty of emotion. By the end of the film, the audience is invested in every single member of War Daddy's tank crew. There's even a brief intermission from the fighting near the middle of the film, in which War Daddy and Ellison separate themselves from the rest of the group. During this time, they forget about the war raging around them, and so does the audience. Then you're quickly brought back into war in Germany as the film blasts into the third act. The best way to describe Euphoria is by making some fairly obvious comparisons to other war movies. It has the realism of Fast Saving Private Rihanna, although the gore isn't quite as gruesome with the heart and dramatization of Gloria Spacers. There's plenty of death and destruction as you learn what it's like to go from a new recruit to a combat veteran over the course of Fafiza 134-minute runtime. However, unlike a Saving Private Ryan, Afloria is a movie that doesn't take away from the acting and emotional attachments by blistering the audience with excessive gore in the name of realism. There's still enough gore to keep the audience focused on the fact that it's World War II, but it's not to the extent of Fast Saving Private Ryan. Furia definitely ranks among the upper echelon of war movies, but it doesn't quite break into the top 4 or 5. It's a solid film with great acting, but you don't make an emotional connection with the tank crew until well into the film. While that's not a bad thing, it's enough to keep it from being one of the best films of the year. It's still a very solid movie and one of writer Director David Ace's best violent content. I didn't want the typical narrative. Director Ayer said, "If you look at film, it's like it goes for Roma Pearl Harbor Saving Private Ryan." And then the victory parade. But the Germans held on until the bitter end. 4 weeks from the end of the war, there were some horrific things going on. Furia takes every chance it can to show those horrific things in red slime. Detail: scores and scores of men, women, and children are battered and butchered for the camera and USA to see. For example, in this film's opening scene, Sergeant Kallur surprises a German officer, knocks the man off his horse, and repeatedly stabs him in the face, gouging out an eye. Later, a tank gets hit with an incendiary device that sets it and its occupants ablaze. One man tumbles out, covered in flames as he gorely shoots himself in the head to stop the agony. When Norman first arrives, he's ordered to clean out the seat of his recently killed predecessor. While mopping up the blood, he also finds sizable remnants of the man's blown-off face. Among the film's Sonya, other grisly images, we see heads blown apart by machine guns and tank shells, corpses crushed under tank threads, German children hanged for refusing to fight, prisoners shot while surrendering, a soldier's skull crushed by an attacker's boot, child soldiers mowed down by gunfire, men blown into chunks by grenades, military vehicles erupting in explosions, buildings and the people in them demolished by artillery fire, the corpses of a group of German officers, and women who apparently committed suicide together, and bulldozers pushing piles of bloody bodies while brutally ripping their way through an overwhelming enemy patina and waiting for their own deaths to inevitably cure. Sergeant Calder and his crew all profess that killing Germans is the best job I ever had, crude or profane. Language: one can't help wonder if life in a Wera tank was really as vulgar as the rampant profanity in this film suggests. Well over 100 Fords and a dozen or so swords pepper the cruise. Dialogue, along with multiple uses of bossy hard high and Aol. God's and Jesus' names are profaned about 15 times each, with the former being combined with the N at least a dozen times. Crude terms are assigned to female body parts. We hear one extremely vulgar reference to oral sex. Drug alcohol content when the soldiers are into killing people in this pic. They're puffing on cigarettes and downing anything that might dull their senses. We see them guzzle wine, beer, and various bottles of hard liquor. Most get pretty drunk on a stopover in a German town. Sergeant Callier sums up the general attitude toward these things when he pulls out a hidden flask before a battle and says, "Might as well get a little tight. Won't be around for the hangover." Other note for the element: Sergeant Collier's crew is a loyal group, but they routinely batter one another with insults and racial slurs. We watch Norman vomit after he makes a bloody discovery. Conclusion: ideals are peaceful, history is violent. Sergeant Collier tells horrified and recoiling Norman Ellison, "This movie wants to make sure we know that, smell that, and chew on that." Phrase. In fact, Afloria rubs our cinematic faces in 2 hours of grimy, dirty, intensely ferocious, charred flesh misery to make sure the point comes through as crystal clear fashion. Some will see that unflinching glimpse at perpetual bloodshed and gray smoking destruction as something of an anti-war declaration. They'll see a cautionary tale of men hollowed out and broken by the unspeakable horrors they've witnessed. Others will see this pic as a one-dimensional splatterfest dressed up in khaki army fatigues with limbs in a numeral being severed by large-caliber machine gun fire and mortar rounds in a story of brutal, hard-fisted soldiers battling a Nazi evil even more wicked than themselves. Everyone will be right. The film's creators crafted it that way, on purpose. But no matter which interpretive path you take, what seems inarguable is how profanely foul, excruciatingly graphic, unwaveringly nihilistic, and downright ugly it all remains. This bit of heroics isn't what I wanted to do. Brad Pitt's battle-scarred sergeant and 100 movie sergeants before him growl, but it's what we're doing. Fury is the sort of World War II. Movie Hollywood used to turn out 4 or 5 times a year a gritty grindside view of combat. The grit is bloodier and are rated now, as is the combat jargon. Firefights have a visceral video game immediacy. It's still a B-movie, but even a B-movie stuffed with cliches can be gripping. Fury, written and directed by David Training Day Ayer, takes us into the claustrophobic confines of a tank and makes a fine star vehicle for Pitt, if not the most original march down World War II lane. The sergeant's war name is War Daddy, and we meet him as his battles, where he crew delivers a dead comrade to base. In the last days of the war, Germany is lashing out with the suicidal fatalism. Fanatical cess troops, old men, boys, and girls are being sacrificed in One last Nazi blood purge. Fury, the name of their tank, is sole survivor of their last mission. Now they've been given a replacement, Logan Lerman, and a new task. The opening credits remind us that U.S. armor was inferior to German tanks, so every mission could be their last. But the cynical crew still matches best job I ever had when the going gets tough. Boyd, Shia LaBeouf, is a drawing Bible-quoting gunner. Grady John Byrne is loader and mechanic, an ugly brute and bully. Gordo, Michael Pena, a nicknamed for the Spanish word for fat. A is the driver. They proceed to haze and abuse the new guy Logan Lerman, whose 80 weeks of training were meant to make him an army clerk. He is as such characters always are in such films. Idealistic ideals are peaceful. The philosopher, sergeant intones with Pitt hitting the line as if it's for posterity. History is violent. In Training Day, saving Private Ryan fashion. The new guy has to see the carnage, a tank's turn earning corpses to goo heads exploding, and the occasional summary execution of the enemy. War Daddy is a bit of a fanatic about killing SS fanatics. Fury gives Pitt a story arc that makes him harder and more cruel than anybody in this crew, which he has kept alive since the North African campaign. But we get hints. There are layers he's hiding, the cast. Around him plays mostly stock characters, but vivid ones. Burnt stands out, and Jason Patric is good as the officer whose scars give him credibility as he sends Fury into harm's way. Ayer's command of history is more solid than clumsier efforts like Inglourious Bastards or U-571. The tank appears to be a relatively rare pursing. The utterly spanned combat reserve pool is straight out of VA history. Guys went into combat and stayed to the finish. Green kids were all that was left for replacements. Arantino touch. The crew forces itself on German women who feed them, as Gordo recollects the horrors of the post-D-Day fillets. Pocket when Germans and their pack animals were slaughtered in the hundreds of thousands. Ayer hasn't Saving Private Ryan, even though he recycles chunks of it. Fury is more like Sam Fuller's personal war memoir. The Big Red One, a straightforward, less poetic in action. Film with a hint of humanity and history that is fast receding from view. It's good, not great, and it's not Ayer's fault that the rarer these B-movies become, the more we expect from them. The first thing I'll say about Euphoria is this. When I read things about actress going to boot camp, toughening and butching up for a long shoot playing brothers in arms, I can't help but roll my eyes. It's also silly. The idea of a pampered group of highly paid actors going off to play army guys, thinking that a week spent together in a nice tent in the mud is somehow going to prepare them to go to fictional war. All the actors involved have graciously conceded in interviews that real soldiers obviously went through much worse. But you can tell while watching a David's torturous movie play out that they think they're doing something pretty tough, pretty macho, pretty cool. And therein lies the problem with a movie like Fury, which tells the story of a tank squad fighting the bitter battles of the last days of we. There's no real historical searching being done here. It's all male posturing. A bunch of fat, tough eyes fantasizing about how badass they would have been in World War II if only they were alive back then. A movie like Fury, which is grueling and brutal and bleak for the wrong reasons, is almost an offense. It pretends that all its annihilating violence is there to illustrate just how terrible war is. But in truth, it's a thriller by the violence. It relishes in it. Ayer films each new nightmare with a reverent, fascinated finding crude, shallow beauty in the most terrible of images. If this movie was about the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, it would be irresponsible. But because it has the buffer of a 70-year remove, it's just dumb. Of course, you could say that a revered movie like Saving Private Ryan, which is of Fury's obvious influence, was also a beautiful illustration of war. But I'd argue that all of that movie's aesthetic grace was at least in service of something broader. That movie plumbed some depth, tapped some vein that is too clumsy or lazy to find. Ayer's script moans and grumbles about God and honor, and all that lead till the copyright door. But that's all a cover, and excuse to tread further into the obliterating destruction that Ayer fetishistically loves. There's no real plot to Fury. Brad Pitt doing a muted variation on Hissa and Glorious Bastards. A character leads a ragtag tank squad through the German mud, a religious triggerman, a riff on Barry Pepper's character in A Saving Private Ryan, only he fires with a huge tank gun. Instead of a sniper rifle, John Byrne, who seems bound and determined to only play detestable characters, is a rotten-toothed D whose savagery is supposed to teach us a lesson about what men become in war. He is, of course, decent at heart. A Michael Pilda plus. Minus is the Michael Pilda plus minus a guy. And a Logan Lerman. Our secret lead is the shaky newbie whom we get to see nearly ruined by war. This is meant to be some somber lesson about innocence in combat, but really Lerman's wide-eyed noob exists to be the vessel through which we discover just how tough and cool these other tank guys are. We're supposed to enjoy watching Lerman become one of them. Much of the film is fiery violence as outgunned American tanks are destroyed by high-tech German death machines. Smaller characters, played by the likes of Xavier Samuel, a Jim Perrick, and a Scott Eastwood die. Gruesome deaths so that our heroes can seem all the more heroic and inexplicably lucky. And then there's the big final battle just like at the end of Fast Saving Private Ryan, only with the action movie antics dialed up and any meaning behind it all near invisible. Pitt and his tank crew entrenched themselves for a suicide standoff meant to be a sign of valor, but looking more like sociopathy. A fury, it turns out. Doesn't value anyone's life, Nazi or otherwise. He has also populated his movie with a few civilians who are treated terribly and ultimately punished for being bystanders because they're pesky. Fragile humanity gets in the way of his orgy of death and awfulness. Also, a private Triana showed there is a way to capture the utter terror of war without being onistic, or hasn't found that way. He's a blunt filmmaker whose taste level tends toward the cheap. I liked his intimate rattling and of watch, even if it ultimately felt pointless. But that was two modern cops in LA battling drug lords. The stuff of many and unassuming. Action movie in a fur. We are talking about a global conflict that killed tens of millions of people. I suppose there might be some merit in how a Floria so crassly addresses the war that it unsettles our comforting noble delusions about it. But that glancing swipe at deeper meaning is, if anything, purely accidental. The obvious intention of Fafia is to out-miserable all other war. Movies plain and simple because then Ayer and company safely back home in Los Angeles can brag all the harder about how they survived. War is hell. Anyone who has seen a number of war films can surmise this. It's the basic backbone of almost every war film not starring John Wayne or Captain America. And by this point, you would think that we have learned that enough by now. But director David Ayer, probably tired of writing LA cops for most of his career, thinks otherwise with The Fury, his second 2014 film after The Risibly. Sabotaged Ayer doesn't just think that we need to see more World War II soldiers diving into the muck. He wants to rub it in our faces until we're left beaten and bruised afterwards. Also bored from exhaustion, Floria follows the crew of the titular Sherman tank as they ride through Germany in the last months of the war. Hitler and the Nazis are desperate enough to use every last strategy possible, including forcing women and children into the fray, and the Allies continue treading through the battered country in the face of superior firepower. One of Fury's crew members has been killed in battle, so now they're stuck with a young replacement, barely out of grade school who hasn't seen a day of combat experience. A Floria is choose a goal-oriented story, in favor of observing these rough Hune men jumping from battle to battle where their only objective is to kill Nazis and survive by the skin of their teeth. If there's something that can be commended about the characters who are as thin as they come without playing into easy stereotypes, it's that the film doesn't shy away from showing the Americans look just as brutal in their tactics as the Nazis were. In one particularly uncomfortable scene, Brad Pitt's Where Daddy breaks and Logan Lerman's Norman by forcing the boy to shoot the surrendered German soldier in the back. War Daddy, who is willing to win at any cost, walks a line between immoral and heroic in Pitt's hands, which is more than can be said for the rest of the tank crew wasting actors. John Byrne, The Walking Dead, Michael Pilda, plus minus a end of watch and a better than E. Average Shia above in one-dimensionally unlikable roles. Lerman, like most of his Dali performances, is serviceable as the audience avatar without making too much of an impression. It's hard to care about most of these people when there seems to care more about how many ways he can turn the human body into minced meat. Watching a Floria is like watching a Saving Private Rihanna edited down to its bare violent scenes, and to his credit, conjures up a couple of tank battles that rival the intense standoffs of Spielberg's film. The 3-on-1 game of chicken is the highlight set piece as the Americans have to outmaneuver the much stronger German tank in close quarters. Small details like the whistle of tank shells and the teamwork tactics employed show off the minutiae of war. That isn't often seen in movies, but the unrelentingly dark tone eventually becomes so overbearing that the violence soon enough turns from shocking to tiring. Without more engaging characters or worthwhile thematic weight, the easy relentlessness of it all turns the film into a one-note core show. Stephen Price's over-out score doesn't help matters, especially in an unexpected death scene that can be predicted the moment you meet these characters. Subtlety isn't in a playbook, and his script works better when it's focusing on a Pitt Lerman dynamic or the life on death struggle of surviving against all odds rather than the atrocities of war. But at least it's better. Thanos. Sabotage Era is best known for writing and or directing such gritty cop dramas as Training Day, End of Watch, and this year's brutal Idiotica Arnold Schwarzenegger vehicle sabotage. And with this film, he takes a giant leap forward in terms of scope and ambition, but only generates middling results. When it comes to the details, Eric Sushi convincingly evokes the look and feel of this period in history, and also does a decent job of suggesting how a quintet of people who would likely never even acknowledge each other in any other circumstances can forge together into a single working unit in times of duress. The action sequences are also nicely staged, with one battle in which the smaller but faster Sherman races around to fight off a larger but slower German Tiger tank, offering some genuine thrills. The trouble with Fury is that while stocking up on all the little details, Ayer has failed to provide much of a narrative for them to hang upon. The film may remind some viewers of the kind of thing that one might have seen on the bottom half of a double bill in 1943, as the storyline is trite and unsurprising. The dialogue is almost always just a little too on the nose, and the climactic standoff against the approaching Nazi forces feels too contrived for its own good. In those aforementioned B-movies, that wasn't such a problem because they usually clocked out at 80 minutes or so and moved quickly enough so that viewers usually didn't notice such flaws. Fury, on the other hand, clocks in at 134 minutes, and it makes you feel every one of them in ponderous detail. The sequence with the German women starts off nicely enough, but goes on forever, before finally arriving at its inevitable payoff. Speaking of ponderous, the film is between Stephen Price's oppressive score and the cacophony of combat. So noisy that if there was an Oscar given for most sound, it would be the clear front-runner. On the acting front, Brad Pitt is good. Of course, he is almost always good, but never quite finds a way of approaching his character that doesn't call to mind. His indelible performance as Aldo Raine in Inglourious Basterds. Likewise, his co-stars turn in decent enough performances, though LaBeouf's attempts to grizzle himself up via darkened teeth and an especially unfortunate mustache may inspire a few bad laughs early on. But the characters are so paper-thin and devoid of any shading beyond their one approved character trait that they aren't able to do much of anything with them to make them live or breathe. Since we have not been given any particular reason to care about these particular characters other than this fact that they are not Nazis, the final conflict, and the personal sacrifices they make wind up having precious little dramatic impact. Fury isn't so much a bad movie, as it is a fairly unnecessary one. From a technical standpoint, it is occasionally quite impressive, and fans of the Wii genre as a whole might find it to be of some interest, though those with weaker constitutions may want to give it the second thought, considering all the blood and guts on display. From a dramatic and emotional perspective, however, it just sort of lumbers along without ever generating a real sense of interest in what is happening on the scene. If only he had spent a little less time on the physical aspects of this project and given a little more thought to the story, characters, and dialogue, he might have been able to truly do Fury honor instead of giving viewers just another Warpod boiler. Okay, basic plot. Brad Pitt is back to killing Nazis, but this time he isn't doing it with a ridiculous southern accent. He's doing it with a tank. Okay, there is actually more to the story. This movie revolves around the combat experiences of 5 men led by a Pitt's character, Sergeant Don Warad de Collier, who operate a tank named Fury. There were so many things that I loved about this movie that picking what to describe first is a bit difficult, but I think the thing I loved most was the script. It's so genuine and focused. Most movies that depict war tend to focus on the battles that changed the landscape of the war or ended the war. But Fury does something great, and just shows you random pieces of it and makes its focus the actual soldiers and not the war itself. The characters are wonderfully written and layered with texture and emotion. This helps you connect with them, care for them, and fear for their lives. I really have to tip my hat to writer and director David Ayer for the quality not only in his script, but also in his depiction of what war does to men. This isn't an overly stylized movie, glorifying war. It's a gritty piece full of emotion and at times true savagery. The dialogue is also really smart and concise. Nothing a character says ever feels unnecessary or wasted. It's there to move the story forward. There's also some great lines in this movie. My favorite probably been when Calder explains that ideals are peaceful, history is violent, but a great script would be nothing without great acting to back it up. And the cast in this movie is brilliant. Obviously, we all know what a good actor Brad Pitt is, but the supporting actors around him also do an amazing job. Shia LaBeouf, in particular, was a delight as the crew's God-fearing religious gunner. But I think the person who really steals the show is Logan Lerman, who plays Private Norman Ellison, an inexperienced and naive soldier who's assigned to replace a dead crewman of the Fury. Even though he's never been in combat or even seen the inside of a tank, I think Lerman's acting and his character were the most vital part of this story. The rest of the crew is battle-hardened, and even though they are good men, war has turned them into monsters. Lerman's character, because of his inexperience and lack of willingness to kill, acts as a buffer for the audience. He adds a broken bar, softness, for lack of a better word, to the story and represents the difficulties that an ordinary person would face if suddenly thrown into the ravages of war. Beyond the emotional and philosophical themes that Fury explores, it's also just a great action movie. Now the director does something interesting with the way he shows gunfire. You know how normally when a bullet is fired from a gun, there's a yellow or white flash of light. In Fury, the director colors the flight of the bullet screen for the Nazis and red for the Allies. So you kind of feel like you're watching Star Wars. It took me a while to get used to this because it felt like they were shooting lasers, and my brain kept half expecting someone to pull out a lightsaber. But it's not a major issue. The battle scenes between tanks in this movie are absolutely amazing. They felt surreal. Shots are going off. Orders are being shouted. People are being blown to pieces. It's amazing. Also, the technique and strategy needed to use a tank as an effective weapon is mind-blowing. And I love the way the film showcased this. I was genuinely afraid during every fight scene and was almost certain the crew wasn't going to survive. And that's the hallmark of a good action movie. The director and the actors made me care about the characters. And that's what makes good movies. Overall, this is a great movie. It shows World War II in a light we haven't often seen. It manages to not be political and boring and keeps the focus on the characters and the fighting, which I loved. One thing I also liked was that it showed that Germans also suffered the full brunt and horror of the Nazi rule. Great movie. Definitely worth a trip to the cinema. The spirit of Sam Peckinpah hangs over the surprisingly grim macho tank drama shot in Hertfordshire and Oxfordshire, which marries the tough man in peril trails of an old-fashioned war movie with the post-saving Private Ryan Viscero of a modern war's hell parable Rakuta Brad. Pita is Donwara Dalier, battle-scarred commander of a 2nd Armor Division. Tank crew who have fought tooth and nail from North Africa to Normandy and now find themselves in endgame Germany, facing the total chaos of Hitler's last stand when one of their number redecorates the inside of the titular. Tank with his face, boyish clerk Logan Lerman is sent to fill the gap. Writer-director David Ayer showing us the horrors of the battlefield through the eyes of an innocent Aberward. Ideals are. Peaceful history is violent. Collier tells his new charge who must learn to put aside his pacifist Gus and mow down Nazis while shouting die, like he means it with its trench mud palette and limb-angling splatter aesthetic. Euphoria takes no prisoners in terms of graphic detail, arms, legs, and heads being severally severed in pursuit of maximum meat, like his scalp-hungry renegade in Glorious Space Pit's more. Daddy likes killing Nazis, although here his soul appears the more hollow for it. Scenes of prisoners being shot in the back and women serving as less spoils of war are juxtaposed with much religious breastbeating void, Bible swan, and uncharacteristically bearable Shiao, quoting scripture while Norman wrestles with his Episcopalian squeamishness. Ultimately, such transcendent concerns are more for show than effect, as with end-of-watch character remains an adjunct to the action which is Ayer's true for lacking the single-minded intensity of Samuel Macbenan, which did a cleaner job of trapping its audience inside a tank. This is still undeniably stirring stuff buoyed by Stephen Price's boisterous score, which builds toward an end-credit theme reminiscent of Jerry Gold's Demonica of a Satan from The Omen. Blimey, a tank veteran on Fury Diaresis Middle Dot. This is the archive of the Observer up until April 21st, 2025. The Observer is now owned and operated by Tortoise Media. Ideas Middle Dot. There was no going back after saving Private Ryan, when Steven Spielberg stripped the varnish from Hollywood war movie showmanship to confront the bullet. Sliced realism of D-Day, he changed everything. Post-Ryan, every World War II story is required to spew up visions of hell on Earth from the theater of war. As disturbing and morally soupy as Brad Pitt's Yoda in Fatigues will expound to blobbing new Boyle O.L. Airman. History is violent. Kelly's Heroes is unthinkable. David's tank epic set as the war begrudgingly enters its sand game in 1945 is determined to scrap away even Ryan's vestiges of nobility to expose the mix of dehumanizing carnage and tight-knit brotherhood, that with a lot of a tank. Crew crawling through the blasted heath of Germany. Taking the imprint of Ryan's squabbling unit and applying a desk boot. Claustrophobia to the clanking, filthy belly of the beast. They imagined gramming 5 unwashed GIs into a rusty, diving ballet Ayer nods to the full spectrum of combat. VA copyright A. Copyright from Cross of Iron to Come and See to Apocalypse. Now, to his credit, Fury is an ambitious attempt to capture the bloody reality of the American advance on Berlin. The crew of Fury, the nickname daubed on the cannon, are not sent on pivotal missions, but simply drag its metal hulk from skirmish to skirmish, clearing a path for the infantry. Air is juddering, grinding warfare is closer to the weary attrition of Iraq than the glossy panoramas of the Battle of the Bulge. Hence, the look is grim. A convincing cloud-scorched earth of shattered farmhouses and isolated towns no more than heaps of corpse-strewn rubble. Air throws in some striking visions. Carpet bombers seen from far below look like a swarm of insects. A German officer on a white horse emerges. Mirajica out of the mist, authentic traces fire like lasers from some phony sci-fi shootout. Sadly, it plows up old turf in other ways too. The crew are less memorable redux of the battle-burnt toughs and Tom Hanks squad. Shia LaBeouf is the Barry Peppers Bible. Toting moralist John Burnt is a jumpy gutter snipe Adam Goldberg type, and Michael Pilda plus minus is the petulant, tokenistic Mexican machine gunnery. A bit burns a bit. Giovanni Revisi, they all murmur memories of atrocity and enact Gerald-sponding rituals, but feel contrived. Are they that much better than their German foes? Attempts to assess SS officers are executed in cold blood. Bodies, friend and foe, popped beneath the tracks. This is what it takes. War. Daddy repeatedly tells Lerman's pale-faced Jeremy Davis like Norman, and we stop believing him. War Daddy proves to be an unregulated flux of intelligence and psychopathology, pumped, full of Pitt supercharged charisma, but he is no more real than Aldo Raine or, for that matter, Tyler Darren. At times, you mistake the film for Training Day, which I wrote relocated to a Western front enlisting German children to fight Hitler's total war with Pitt spouting survivalist aphorisms from the turret of his prowling tank. There is not even that much tank battling to get excitated about. While we get a visceral taste of spending a war shoved up against a comrade's ass, there is only one truly thrilling sequence of metal-on-metal dueling as 3 Shermans and a German Tiger enacted death dance like super-sized dolls. It is only here that Air manages fast as well as furious. David of Floria is a ferociously gory World War II film that raises all kinds of ugly moral questions before losing them. In a cloud of blood and gore, it begins smashingly, though with turns you rarely see in stories of the greatest generation. The scarred, leather-faced tank commander Don Warad Ayer, and aggressively deglamorized Brad Pitt, butchers a solitary German officer rather than take him prisoner. A short time later, he not only decides to shoot an SS man who surrenders to him, but he forces on an excruciatingly prolonged scene. A jittery clerk typist, private Norman Ellison, Logan Lerman to pull the trigger. "Don't make me do this," weeps Allison as Collier slaps him and wrestles him into position to fire a bullet into the head of a man who has pulled out photos of his wife and children and is begging for his life. And then AA blame "I've never been to war." But I've read enough personal reminiscences to know that what haunts many vets say sometimes as much as watching other soldiers die is the murders they committed or witnessed. It's important to hear about those actions, not necessarily because these men should be held to account. It's because killing people, either prisoners or civilians, is the one thing they're not allowed to talk about when they come back. There's no outlet for it. It's the great unmentionable, and on the evidence, it eats at them for the rest of their lives. Watching a heroic star, like Pitt, play an American World War II commander who kills and does other unsavory things without conscience, we're forced to acknowledge the real meaning of war is hell. It's not just what the bad guys do, it's what the good guys do too. Yes, I know Pitt killed Nazis with relish in Quentin Tarantino NASA and Glorious Space Sturds, but that was weak compia means to be ultra-realistic. Ayer has a grip on all his slippery issues. There's a nightmarish absurdity about this final, horrendous burst of fighting. It's spring of 1945 when Nazi defeat is all but certain, and yet Hitler has called for total war. Calder and his men roll into an Allied camp inside Germany, with the corpse of their beloved gunner still in the tank in pieces. Private Ellison, who's supposed to take the dead man's spot, has to clean up what's left of him, which includes part of her face. They murdered some good boys out there. Today, call your superior, tells him. The tank commander lessens, outward feeling burned away, but clearly agonized inside, rolling past German civilians hung by Nazis. He utters one of his many suitable for framing lines. Ideals are peaceful. History is violent. Calder accepts his own formulation with alacrity. He intends to kill every German he sees on the end of his tank's gun. The word Floria is scrolled. The others in his crew consist of Shia LaBeouf, is a religious soldier who sees God's will in everything. His number came up. That's all. Michael, pilled a ±A as a smartass. And John Byrne has the roughest looking. They're not such nice guys. They bully Lerman's Ellison. They applaud whatever Kahlur does, even when it's technically a war crime. But as they fight, you come to accept them, love them. It's part of Fafuri's creeping relativism. Ayer serves up the ultimate test of our sympathies, in the long, strange centerpiece in which Calder and young Ellison make themselves. At home in the flat of two German women, Anna-Marie Morena and Alicia von Rittberg, the air is heavy with the threat of sexual violation, and the women are virtual slaves to Collier's whims. When Pay the ±A and Burnt show up, the atmosphere becomes even more fraught. You wonder if these women will survive the encounter with our boys. The sappy romantic note on which the scene ends is nearly unforgivable. The violation is that there's no violation. Americans are sweeties at heart. Floria doesn't lose its hold on you, though some of the images are so hideous that they have the quality of myth, such as the corpse. The tank rolls over that is so flattened it is merged with the mud potato. He doesn't disappear into his part. He's obviously putting on his trolley has an impressive stillness. He knows he's playing both a man and a symbol, and he lets camera take his measure. Pay till the ± a burn. And even Loa, even because the actor's sanity has lately been questioned, are fine. And while Lerman overdoes his character's lip-licking nilled the macaron vet at the copyright, the writing isn't exactly nuanced. Allison is the movie's moral pivot and the character who suffers most when Ayer returns to formula with a vengeance. Dada Floria comes down to whether the fresh-faced, horror-stricken clerk typist can prove his manhood by rocking out behind a big gun as he sprays Germans with bullets. The revulsion that Steven Spielberg maintained to the end of Fast Saving Private Triana is nowhere inside. Ayer betrays his own values with a climax that's like a hack gamer's recreation of Peck and Pea of the Wild Bunch. The final encounter between Ellison and the German soldier is meant to offer humanist balance, but in context, it's ludicrous. You can't believe Ayer thought he could get away with it. Though macho Fafuria crumbles in the mind, the power of its best moments lingers. The routing of Ellison as he's forced to kill, the frightening vibe of the scene with German women, the meanness on some soldiers' faces, and soul sickness on others. Our knowledge that German surrender is imminent gives the film an aura of tragic senselessness. This doesn't need it to happen, but he knows that much of his audience consists of jocks eager to see Nazis, is royally wasted, and he gives them what they want. He represents the best and worst of American filmmaking. Ideals are peaceful. Ditching them selectively wins. The battle of the box office. Basically, war turns even the most decent of men into monsters. It's not a theme that hasn't been explored before, but David, Floria is a particularly ugly iteration of Ida Brokenbar, and I mean that as a compliment. Skies are gray, the ground is muddy. This might be the muddiest movie I've ever seen. And everywhere is blood, pain, and desperation. There's not much of a story, just an episodic series of nasty, brutal engagements for the crew of a U.S. Army tank nicknamed Fury and commanded by Sergeant Don Ward de Collier Brady, Pitt, and the counselor. As they push deeper into Germany in April 1945, they guess that the war must be over soon as the Germans have resorted to putting two big uniforms on scared kids and guns into their hands. I bet it's only the fact that we watching know that IDA will be over soon and that the Nazis will lose that allows some respite from atmosphere of relentless hopelessness. Air sabotage immerses us in, for we see how quickly the new guy, Logan Lerman AOAA, just transferred from the typing pool and not drained to machine gun dead bodies as he is ordered to do at one point. Becomes as hard and as Cold as his colleagues, which also include born-again Bible Xiao maniac. Repulsive Kun ask John Burnt Lay, the Wolf of Wall Street, and Gordo Michael pay the plus minus A American Hustle. Probably the closest to normal of all of them, before Norm. Arrived, there are images here that are among some of the most terrible I've ever seen on screen. One will be seared in my brain forever, I suspect. And then Ayer is the extraordinary scene that challenges our notion of what constitutes a good guy, both on screen and in real life, in which Keir is shown to be so far gone ethically and morally that he either doesn't realize or doesn't care that he is being utterly menacing toward two German civilian women, Alicia van Ritber and Danny Maria Morena Europa Report, and may in fact believe himself to be behaving in a chivalrous way toward them. The sneaking complexity in what appears to be stark and sentimental sparness say I particularly like Collier's query of Bible. Do you think Jesus loves Hitler? A. Lingers. It's deeply unpleasant, far more upsetting than I was expecting. I sobbed through quite a bit of the film, and Near Genius Furia is a good solid World War I. The two movie nothing more and nothing less, rugged, macho violent, and with the story sufficiently unusual to grab and hold interest. It's a modern version of the sort of movie Hollywood turned out practically every week back in the 1940s and 1950s today. And because it stars a Brad Pitt in what deserves to stand as an emblematic performance, it seems like a bigger deal. And the film's mild case of pretentiousness in the climactic stretch is its one notable problem. Whether women flock to see Pitt playing a brutal, war-hardened but wise soldier is a question, but guys will have no trouble jumping on board for this rough ride through the final phase of the war, which augurs a solid box office run through the fall for this Sony release. A Navy man himself, writer, director, David smartly moves away from the feverish cop and urban crime dramas he's written and sometimes directed. Training Day is SW, a Dark Blue, A Harsh Times, A Street. King's A End of Watch to channel his dramatic ferocity into a story of the Allies' final ground assault on the Third Reich. It's a combat unit centered on a group of 5 led by a Pitt Sergeant Don Wardad Delier, a tank commander with the tuned armor division who's seen it all from Africa to Belgium and the Netherlands, and now in April 1945, deep into Germany where, although faced with certain defeat, the Nazis intend to fight to the last dot, when a striking cut with the sides shaved close but the top more luxuriant, almost WWI Russian. Style A War Daddy is a hard man and proves it in the way he breaks in newcomer Norman Ellison. Logan Lerman, a green kid trained as a typist who's abruptly thrown into a tank for the first time as the assistant driver. As a rite of passage, War Daddy forces Norman to shoot a captured SS officer. And this will hardly be the only thing he does for the first time during the 24 hours the story encompasses. From dawn to dawn. The other guys aboard Fury, the nickname that's painted on the gun barrel of their M4 Sherman tank. A.E. Gunnerboard Swan, Shia LaBeouf, a fierce warrior, but also a religious and thoughtful man. His load of Grady Travis, John Byrne, a scruffy belligerently of the First Order, and driver Trini Garcia, Michael Pena, an alert Mexican-American with a taste for the bottle. To his credit, he has written these men as something a bit more than types, especially Boyd. A role in which Loof is actually appealing and strong on screen for the first time in ages. Maybe the army discipline was good for him. After the Yanks secure a town, there's time for momentary RR War Daddy, who speaks fluent German, takes the Bonhomme Norman under his wing and happens upon a nice apartment occupied by a mother, Anna Maria Morena, and her lovely teenage daughter Ma Alicia von Ritberg. Naturally terrified, the women are tentatively put at their ease by War Daddy, who offers them some food. What seems at first destined to be a brief encounter becomes extended into something resembling a complex one-act play simmering with innuendo uncertain. Agenda's latent danger, sexual desire, mortal fear, and day when the other men, particularly the uncontrollable animal. Grady joined the party, a disruptive violence in the end. It's a poignant and tragic interlude. The best passage in the film, one that addresses the damage psychological, emotional, and physical aid that war causes beyond the immediate casualties of battle. Its qualities also cast a shadow on the remainder of the film, which is occupied by a quasi-suicidal mission that War Daddy is ordered to undertake by a Captain Jason Isaacs sporting a thick New York accent. The command is issued so quickly that it's not really clear why it's so important for Fury and 3 other tanks. To rush behind enemy lines, the Americans know they're going to win. So the puzzlement over the reason for sending men into such peril at this stage impedes one's investment in the climactic action. It's this part of the drama that most closely resemble as a Samuel Maoza's 2009 Israeli film, The Lebanon, which detailed what it's like for men to occupy a fetid claustrophobic metal vault on wheels while being bombarded by cardo, but plunking War Daddy and his men down in such an impossible position doesn't feel right dramatically. And the Sergeant's stoic reaction, while perhaps philosophically apt for the circumstances, introduces a note of windy grandiosity that mildly rubs the wrong way against everything that's come before. But even if his character is denied an entirely satisfying send-off, Pitt is terrific here as a seasoned pro who's tough, because the war has made him so, but clearly has a lot going on. Inside, there can be no doubt he's committed. Acts he regrets as a brave, bold fighter and a thinking soldier to boot. He's exactly the kind of man you want on your side in a tight spot and whom you'd willingly follow into battle. As the greenhorn thrown into the deep end of war, Lerman, the perks of being a wallflower, Noah serves as a sympathetic viewer proxy who, even in one day, receives rich schooling from War Daddy. The other men register solidly, and it would be difficult not to be touched by. The girl played so nicely by Van Ripperg, who played the Tina Rami Schneider in a recent German TV movie, who was pushed to a full range of emotional extremes in one afternoon, shot on film. On English locations, Euphoria has an attractively mooded look that strongly reflects the weather, time of day, and immediate circumstances, is chewing the handheld documentary look he employed with Ayer and of Watch. Cinematographer. Rome Invasion goes the other way here with what one might call a look of rugged refinement. The tanks, uniforms, equipment, and sets all contribute to a vivid sense of realism. Floria isn't bad, but it promises more than it can deliver. Perhaps if you've never seen a World War II movie or any story about the Raj House camaraderie of men in battle, you'll be forgiving of its tropes. The battle scenes are intense, and the characters well drawn, if taken from a familiar Hollywood playbook. But writer-director David set out to show us a side of Way we haven't seen before, and in that, he has fallen short. As a throwback to 1940s storytelling, Floria does score points. Brad Pitt is a solid job as a smart, swaggering tank commander nicknamed War Daddy, who leads his crew into Germany in April of 1945. During the war's final days, there is mortal danger at every turn. Lurking in the woods or hiding out of sight in a seemingly quiet village, the Nazis refuse to give up. Pitt and his men have already seen war at its worst, unlike their new green recruit Logan Lerman, and nothing shocks them anymore. They all know they've committed atrocities, and it has changed them forever. Now they're just trying to stay alive. The colorful, multi-ethnic characters who populate Pitt's tank named Fury could have come from a vintage movie like Howard. Hawk Air Force. A Shia is nicknamed Bible because he's always quoting from the Good Book. Michael Pilda plus minus is a sharp-eyed Mexican-American gunner, known as Gordo. John Burnt is an aggressive Southern hick nicknamed Ass, and fresh-faced Lerman is Norman, the new guy who's been sent into action from the typing pool. Any of this sound familiar? What a director like Hawk couldn't have envisioned is the ability to make wartime violence seem so real in the post-Saving Private Ryan era. And with the help of CGI, a filmmaker like Eric can bring home the horrors of combat, long range, and close-up. The feeling is compounded during a pre-pass sequence in which Pitt and Lerman take a time out from fighting to socialize with a German woman and her teenage daughter. The point of the scene is made early on, and then driven home repeatedly with diminishing effect. For the presumably male audience that craves action, Floria delivers the goods. Brad Pitt fans will also be pleased, but I was hoping the film would offer insights about a face of World War II that hasn't often been explored, a broken bar, and that's the source of my disappointment. Leonard Moulton is one of the world's most respected film critics and historians. He is best known for his widely used reference work, Leonard Moulton's Movie Guide, and its companion volume, Leonard Moulton's Classic Movie Guide, now in its 3rd edition, as well as his 30-year run on television Z. Entertainment Tonight. He teaches at the USC School of Cinematic Arts and appears regularly on Reel's channel and Turner Classic Movies. His books include the 151 Best Movies You've Never Seen of Mice and Magic, A History of American Animated Cartoons, The Great Movie Comedians, The Disney Films, The Art of the Cinematographer, Movie Comedy Teams, The Great American Broadcast, and Leonard Moulton's Movie Encyclopedia. He served 2 terms as president of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, is a voting member of the National Film Registry, and was appointed by the Librarian of Congress to sit on the Board of Directors of the National Film Preservation Foundation. He hosted and co-produced the popular Walt Disney Treasures DVD series and has appeared on innumerable television programs and documentaries. He has been the recipient of awards from the American Society of Cinematographers, the Telluride Film Festival, Anthology Film Archives, and San Diego's Comic-Con International. Perhaps the pinnacle of his career was his appearance in a now classic episode of South Park. Or was it Carmela? Consulting his movie guide on an episode of The Sopranos? He holds court at lem.com. Follow him on Twitter and Facebook. You can also listen to him on his weekly podcast, Mullen Movies, a artwork by Drew Friedman, but Sergeant Don Collier doesn't take it as a comment on his age or as an insult. It's just his nickname, a label that each member of a tank crew earns. Collier's comes from the fact that he's commanded this MLI assortment of soldiers for a long time. They were killing Germans in North Africa way back when they fought through Italy and Normandy. And years later, they're still all fighting together, making their way across Germany in the waning days of World War II. It's the spring of 1945, and you can feel that this nasty war is in its endgame. But there's still a lot of fighting to be done, and it's more dangerous now than ever. The enemy is desperate, in retreat, and setting up for a suicidal last stand. And even though Hitler may have had to start forcing children into the battle to bolster his troops, the German army still has plenty of tanks, brutal beasts of war, more heavily armored and powerful than anything the Americans can field. That, however, won't stop Collier's crew with a new private manning the bow. Gun. They'll be giving more than they get. Sure, that Norman kid is green and afraid of dying, and even more afraid to pull a trigger, but they'll knock him into shape. Once he gets an eyeball of what war can do, when he sees what horrors one man can do to another man, he won't be dragging his feet on killing anymore. After all, they scrawl at a flurry on the barrel of their M4 Sherman's big gun for a reason. Calder and company plan on delivering the full fury of the American fighting machine until every last villainous German is dead and gone. Positive elements. World War II has often been idealized in film. Not so here. As black and white as the conflict was, this struggle of good versus evil, liberating Europe from slavery, no less. People assume the fighting was also black and white. It wasn't. It was just as morally hazardous and spiritually toxic as anything that happened in Vietnam, director David Ayer said in A.com article. To that end, Private Norman Ellison is our everyman on-screen representative who early on box at and struggles against the cruelty and borderline criminal actions of his battlefield compatriots. He even offers to die himself rather than murder an unarmed prisoner. Even though Norman's attitudes shift by movies, and he, Sergeant Calder, and the rest of his crew stick by one another and heroically defend an important military objective. Elsewhere, a German officer inexplicably lets a captured American soldier go, rather than killing him. Spiritual elements. When Norman first shows up, he's grilled by another tank crewman about his salvation. We find out that this guy, nickname of the Bible, is a fundamentalist Christian. We see him praying over a wounded soldier and quoting scripture several times before battle. That said, his faith doesn't keep Bible from being every bit as foul-mouthed, boozy, and death-dealing as the rest of his crew. In fact, he rationalizes that relishing the slaughter of the enemy is a positive thing since it's God's work. He annuns, I am the instrument, not the hand. Norman, we find out, is a Presbyterian. His faith informs his initial hesitation with regard to following in his crewmates' crude and deadly directions, but he tosses those convictions aside fairly, quickly in the bloody heat of battle. For his part, Sergeant Collier generally scoffs at the idea of God's hand being involved in their lives, even though he later demonstrates some knowledge of the Bible by quoting from the book of Isaiah. Sexual romantic content while traveling in their tank, Norman sees a pretty young woman on the side of the road. One of his fellow crew members points out that she would likely have sex with him for a candy bar. That statement is born out later when women readily accept small payments and accompany soldiers for off-screen trysts. In a captured German town, Sergeant Collier takes Norman up to the apartment of two women. He pays food and cigarettes for Norman to share the younger woman's bed behind closed doors. It should be noted that this is not played as either prostitution or rape, but as an absurdly scripted romantic moment for both Norman and the German girl. While helping a woman up on his tank, a soldier hikes up her skirt. There are jokes about and performing sex acts with Hitler, and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.